Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the order and note members present, councillors, staff, and some visitors on Zoom tonight. First of all, let's start with land acknowledgement. We will begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are gathered on the land that we have been inhabited by Indigenous people since time immemorial. We would like to recognize that we are in the Robinson Superior Treaty territory, and the land on which we are gathered today is a traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. Specifically, we acknowledge the neighboring community of Mishkot First Nation, to whom we have great respect. We also recognize the contributions of all Indigenous people, including Métis, in shaping and strengthening the community and the province of Ontario. Want to any disclosure of peculiar interest? Seeing none, we'll move on. Approval of the agenda. Can we get a mover? Melanie, Councillor Pilon. We'll start off tonight with a presentation from Mr. Peter Fries, the Municipal Tax Equity Consultation Inc. on the ABSAT apportionment review. Maureen, just want to say before I ask you to take over?
No, thank you. Peter has a presentation and he'll review it on the screen, and a copy was shared with council along with his report. So we welcome Peter to the meeting.
Thank you, and thank you, Your Worship. I will share my screen. Hopefully that will go smoothly and you can see it. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Council, for having me here today. I'll turn off my video for a second. I'll turn it back on if there's questions or discussions. This is just a very brief overview of the review that MT undertook on behalf of the municipality of the DSAB sharing formula, and specifically how the power grant revenue you receive from the province feeds into that formula, how it's handled, and what it means for your overall apportionment. I'm going to go through very briefly. I'm not going to get into a lot of technical details about the calculations we undertook. I could speak to those. They're definitely documented in the report, available to anybody who wants to read them. I'm going to keep it to the general approach and findings. So, as a member of the Algoma District Service Administration Board, you are responsible for contributing to the board's funding. And as part of this, they bring in an alternate formula, and that alternate formula attaches to that power dam revenue. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is. But generally, from a reason why I'm speaking to you today, is we were enlisted to review that approach, that apportionment approach, how they treat that revenue. And we're going to mention, and we mentioned in the report, there's certain legislation, there's financial figures, but we were not providing a legal opinion. We weren't trying to determine whether the board's practices are strictly legal, whether somebody's done something wrong or right. We're approaching this from a public policy perspective, with a focus on whether the approach is reasonable and equitable. Does it make sense? From a public policy perspective, is there logic behind it, and does it hold true today? Because this approach has been in place for a long time. So that needs to be clear. We're not, doing a review from a technical or financial point of view. And we also set out, and we told staff at the outset, we're not sort of like a firm that does recovery, like a GST type thing. We didn't know what we were going to find, whether your preliminary indications were in line with what we would find or not. So we're, again, looking at this really from an equity perspective. So before we get into the alternate sharing, I'll just briefly describe how DSAB budgets are shared amongst municipalities by the default formula, what the Act says. And it's quite simple. It uses what we call weighted CVA, and weighted CVA is simply an expression of, your residential CVA, the CVA in your home is weighted CVA. It's $1 for $1. If you have a farm and it's a ratio of 0.25, we're going to say your weighted CVA for that property is only 25 cents on the dollar. If you have an industrial property and municipality A happens to have a ratio for industrial that's 2 times a ratio of 2, then $1 of CVA is going to be $2 of weighted CVA. What it's simply saying is that if all the money from the municipality were raised from residential CVA alone, that's an equal amount. And the reason they use this formula in the DSABs is the same way that county and regional levies are distributed within a two-tier circumstance, is it takes away the local spending. So in other words, a municipality A may have the exact same assessment as municipality B, but the taxes in municipality B may be much higher. And they may be higher because of poor management. They may be higher because the municipality just likes the tax, or it could be higher because they have far more services. So when we compare municipality A and B, somebody could choose to live in one or the other because of the services, the way municipalities run. But from a DSAB perspective, those are the same municipalities. They have the same basic assessment base as a proxy for population and density. So that's why they use weighted CVA and not tax revenue. And so basically, whatever your share of weighted CVA is your share of the contribution, the levy share. And what's important to note is it doesn't matter, as I say, how much property tax you're raising off every dollar of CVA. The contribution per weighted CVA or per residential CVA, in our hypothetical example here, in each of these hypothetical municipalities, they are all raising different amounts of money from $100,000 of residential CVA. Under the default DSAB formula, all the contributions that flow through to the DSAB would be equal. So in other words, in municipality 1, I have a $100,000 home. I'm paying $1,450 in property tax. 286 of that is going to the DSAB, and that's how the default formula works. And we're going to come back to that a bit later. We talk about where we are compared to the default. Why are we talking about hydro dams? Well, in 2001, the province made hydroelectric dams, certain properties, exempt from property tax, but did say at the time they were going to compensate municipalities for the lost revenue by way of grants. So when that property tax dropped off and became a grant, what that meant for the default DSAB formula is it turned into zero weighted CVA, because that exempt tax, that exempt assessment no longer attracted a rate. So there was no weighting. The ratio or the weighting factor for exempt CVA is zero. So the DSAB said, well, you're still getting a large, revenue stream from that. We feel that, we should treat it as if it was still taxable because your revenue hasn't been impacted. We shouldn't change, for example, Wawa's proportional share. And you'll see back 2002, based on the FIR information, your property tax and your grant, they were almost equal. So back then the grant was $2,047,104. You're raising about $2.79 million in property tax. So the grant was making up 42%. So your DSAB share would have decreased dramatically. It's not unreasonable that they would have wanted to attach to this, and they attached to it in other jurisdictions as well, other DSABs. In 2022, we can see how much things have changed, though. Your grant has really not increased, but due to growth and budgetary pressures and inflation, your revenue has had to go up substantially. It's increased dramatically. It's increased by 54%. 82 of that has been on the property tax burden. The province pretty much stopped indexing that. If the province had have indexed that grant like they said they were going to, and this is important, and on the basis that this sharing formula that the DSAB uses was predicated, that would be $3,277,500 at this point. And it's not. it's only 2.3 million. So, you know, when we went back in time, they created this formula, and it was predicated on the idea that that money was going to keep pace with everything else, and it hasn't. So what have they done? Well, they used their power to exercise a alternate method for apportionment. They brought in that budget, that grant amount into the formula, and they essentially said, if power dams were still taxable, how much would they have received? They being the DSAB in 2001, and they set the 2002 figure at that. So the dollar amount calculated at the time was $870,000 or $870,879. That's 42% of Wawa's $2.47 million grant. The problem is they are still asking today, in today's world, 20 years later, their formula still asks how much of the grant would be shared if the was raised from property tax in 2001. Well, that is a bit of an irrelevant question and an irrelevant measure in my mind. It's dependent on what that share would have been 21 years ago. So while the board's original calculation had a reasonable relationship to what the tax shares may have been in 2002, the legitimacy of those 2001 circumstances, that's eroded over time. As we've moved away from 2001, the measure using 2001 indicators has become less and less valid or defendable or reasonable each year as we moved away from that. So, while those annual shares that they are claiming of your grant are technically tied to a stated process, roughly tied to the stated process, it has changed a bit over time, but that's just really around the margins. It's difficult to conclude that the amounts are anything other than arbitrary in 2022 because we're just not using a current measure of any sort. So, and again, there was assumptions behind that methodology that didn't come to fruition. So things have changed, mainly the province not keeping pace with inflation. And we see how different that is when we saw that slide where we say, here was your split back then, and here's your split now. It's a lot different. So how do we quantify this, and how did we measure how far out we are? Well, it was fairly simple. The math is a little complex, but rather than asking how much would be shared if that money was raised from tax in 2001, we asked how much if it was raised from tax in 2022. We basically went through the same motions that the DSAB did in 2002, but we did it in 2022 with current circumstances that reflect the current mix of population, people, assessment, and weighted assessment across the DSAB today. We calculate that they would arrive at approximately 337,000 versus $1 million that the municipality is actually required to remit this year. So, in 2022, Wawa's required to remit approximately 42.54% of their grant based on the 2001 apportionment factors, which is equal to $10,956 per $1 million of weighted CVA. So if we were to raise that money from the property tax, and again, this is exactly what they asked themselves in 2002, we would be raising $10,956 per million of weighted CVA in Wawa. In contrast to that, municipal contributions based on the actual tax base, and this is true DSAB wide, 3,439 per million of weighted CVA. So we see how far away that share is. Pardon me. Now, that's only part of your contribution, but when we mix that in with your contribution, basically what we're saying is that if that was raised from property tax today, in 2021, if that grant was raised from the property tax, then this would be the discrepancies we would see. That the municipalities without power dams within the district would be paying $3,439 per million of weighted CVA. Wawa overall would be paying $5,815, or 69% more. So these are real. These are real numbers that are affecting the distribution. They're claiming a massive proportion of your grant that's disproportionate with what you are paying on your property tax based contribution and what everybody else is paying. This is a terrible slide to have in a slide deck because there's so many numbers on it. Basically, if it was redistributed, the 2022 DSAB requirements were redistributed based on 2021 instead of 2001 circumstances, this would be the impact. That you would be paying $613,000 or almost $614 less than you are, and the cost would increase and be shared across the other municipalities. North Shore would also see a slight decrease. Now, one of the things about this discussion, and we get into these discussions about DSABs and municipalities, is that we get away from the idea that who's paying for this, who's carrying these costs. And it's very easy to fall into the trap of, oh, it's a discussion about the DSAB corporate and the municipality of Wawa. They're both governments, they both have lots of money. That's not what's happening here. Every dime that you pay in excess is being covered by your taxpayers. So the DSAB burden for $100,000 of residential CVA, which is pretty close to your average residential property in Wawa, actually, is quite a bit higher. In right now, every residential property, $582 equivalent, flows through to the DSAB from their property taxes on $100,000 of residential CVA. And whereas non-power dam municipalities, that their draw against that weighted assessment is $344 per weighted 100,000 of weighted CVA. So this has a real ground level effect on the taxpayers, the people that are serviced by the DSAB, the people that make up the DSAB, the reason the DSAB's there. And Wawa taxpayers are paying more than than any other taxpayers on their $100,000 of residential CVA. So in sum, and I know I've gone through this quickly, I'm happy to answer as many questions as people have or clarify anything. We don't question the board's inclusion of the power dam amounts and the apportionment formula. I do feel that's reasonable from a public policy and an equity perspective. But we have concerns with the limited attention that was given to how this would be managed over time. There was no forward-looking tools. There was nothing built into that formula that would account for inevitable shifts in the balance of taxation and the balance of population over time. There were actually some clauses in that formula that would account for things that what ifs that may never have happened. And as I said to your staff, what's amazing is they accounted for some hypothetical far out what ifs, but they didn't account for the inevitable changes that were necessarily going to happen, which I feel is lacking from it. So, you know, right now we're 20 years out of date. Simple as that. We're basing this on 2001, and it's no longer a valid measure. So, you know, that being said, in terms of next steps, I didn't put any specific points here, but in pursuing this, you know, it's been a 20-year migration away from equity. You know, whatever solution will give us a path back, would give the municipality a path back, even if it's not in one fell swoop, I think would be very worthwhile to pursue. So that is the end of my content from these slides, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Who wants to go first? Any questions? Go ahead. Councillor.
Peter, it's Councillor Hatfield. Being reported from the radio stations here and several other people. So this is going to go out throughout the town that we have been paying this much money to that staff. Like, what are, as the councillor, what are we supposed to say to people?
Well, I think that through you, Mr. Mayor, that could be, the municipality is working on it. You've undertaken there was a general flag of this issue a year ago. We were engaged to drill down and look at it in a more detailed basis. Our review is more focused. And ideally, the municipality will pursue a solution. Now that is up to council, but that, if you're going to do that, then that's what you would tell them if you decide that you're going to pursue a solution or you're going to try to secure a better outcome. You don't single-handedly control these apportionments. So it's a process, and it may be not the fastest process in the world.
Councillor Gillen, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Hello, Peter. Thank you very much for your presentation. I understand that the approach taken was to identify if the review applied was reasonable or equitable. And I understand that going back to all of the communities that are included in GSAB and saying, we identified that there was an inequitable approach taken over the past 20 years. Does everybody want to make it better? That might be perhaps a naive approach that might, not happen overnight. Would you think that it would be reasonable for us to undertake, or is there an opportunity to provide a case study or examples of like a full GSAB overview? Because if there's this, if this error happened over the past 20 years, is there others that maybe affect other communities within the GSAB that could be overlooked and other communities might be motivated to review at SAB's policy? The GSAB, right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, these are complex organizations, particularly when we talk about the partnership between municipalities. So I couldn't speculate what might be, worth looking at in terms of how they operate. I couldn't even speculate that. There are other DSABs with similar concerns that outdated apportionment formulas are, not working anymore, and they need to be reviewed. It is difficult because what we don't have, like, if you calculate my tax bill wrong, there's a mechanism within the Municipal Act where I can file an application, and there's a process, and council has to hear my argument. I don't have to get political to raise it on your agenda. You have to listen to my explanation of why I think my taxes were calculated wrong. There's no formal appeal mechanism or anything here. So we I think that for a number of reasons, the approach maybe to get the agenda item rolling with the DSAB, and it's hard to tell how much purchase you will get there. There are other things the municipality could do. There's other ways of going at it, but that's where I would recommend you begin. Again, for a number of reasons, I won't get into the minutia of it now, unless you would like me to. But I think an attempt to raise this issue is sort of the next step.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Yeah, I think the overall point of this exercise is we did study it, reviewed it, came up with these what it looks like, and I think, council and staff, we have to, take it forward and, plan a strategy and, go forward from there. Any questions? Peter, I'd like to thank you for that presentation. That was very well done, and the explanations were very well done, and I think we'll take it forward from here at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, council, for having me. As staff knows, I could be any assistance or support. If you have any questions, please just send them through to staff. And if you think of something that you want to ask, let me know and I'll get back to you. And everybody else have a nice evening and the rest of your meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we've got that on our plate for the next little while. We'll go on to number 5, adoption minutes. Can I get a mover? Councillor Jason? Business rise in the previous meeting, none. We move on to new business. 7.1, we got this request. Now, I'm curious about this. Didn't we put a policy out there that this wouldn't come, these requests wouldn't come back to council?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we did. Staff brought a waiver of fees policy to council, I believe in July. Staff is still reviewing that policy based on the input from council. That policy was not approved that evening. We plan to bring it back to council at the next meeting. But in the interim, requests like these will follow the existing practice of coming to council. On this particular item, this is a seniors expo, which the municipality and the council have supported in the past by waiving the fees. It follows most of the recommendations we have in the waiver of fees around it's open to everyone, there's no cost to participate, it fits all the check boxes of what council has supported in the past.
Yeah, at this point, I'll support it. City councillors? Yeah, we will support them.
And there'll be a motion in the regular meeting tonight to approve the waiver of the fee and also the waiver of the transit fee should any senior phone the transit and take the transit to the event.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on it? Okay. We'll go to 7.2. Kathy, Joint Compliance Audit Committee. You wanna?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in accordance with the Municipal Elections Act, council is required to appoint a compliance audit committee on behalf of the municipality. And the purpose of the compliance audit committee is to oversee or receive complaints regarding whether an elector believes that on reasonable grounds that a candidate has contributed to any provisions within the Municipal Elections Act, and more specifically related to their campaign finances. So in the past, in 2018 and 2014, we did try to recruit individuals to sit on our compliance audit committee, and we had a lot of difficulty attracting individuals. So in 2018, what we had done is we asked the clerks of the surrounding communities if they would act as members of our compliance audit committee. There would be no cost to the municipality other than if there were travel expenses for those individuals to come to Wawa and other expenses related to meals, if that was required. So basically what this report is stating is that for Wawa, Shapiro, Duberville, and White River would be our compliance audit committee, and then Wawa would be on Chapelo's, Duberville, and Horn Pig as the Ringbuilder Compliance Audit Committee. We are required to have a bylaw in place and appoint the committee by September 29th of 2022. So I'm recommending that council later this evening approve the bylaw to appoint the Compliance Audit Committee with the representation from the clerks of the area communities based on this statute.
Any questions? Go ahead, Councilor Jason. You good? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we go on to second quarterly financial report. You gonna handle that?
Yes, unfortunately, Manuela provides her regrets. She's not feeling well this evening, so I'll do my best to present and highlight her report. This is a practice of the Wayfinders report that was recommended that we inform council at quarterly times regarding our situation with the budget. It is at a high level, but this is to the period June 30th. And council certainly understands not all bills necessarily due in June get processed by June 30th. So it's a picture in time to what we have processed to June 30th. The majority of the revenues are meeting budgeted levels. So as some of the larger variances that we note, it's again because of that timing. For example, the hydro dam grant is not received until late July, even though we budgeted in quarterly incoming revenues, but we do not receive that budget till the third and fourth quarter. So it doesn't reflect in the June 30th bill, but I can and will confirm with council, we did receive the 2.3 million without any inflation added, again, as previous years last month. Building permit fees have exceeded our estimated budget amounts. There's a lot more building activity, fire permits, the community is quite active, and we've exceeded our budget amounts by 54%. And in terms of infrastructure, there's some variances to revenues just to do timing capital projects, the hazardous waste day that'll occur later in the year. The airport, as council can see in the report, we have exceeded our revenues at the airport that were budgeted pretty substantially. And that's because of the fuel sales, the increase, the prices to the fuel sales and the increased uses of our airport by landing aircraft. And the other thing to note is the Mitch McCott Memorial Community Center. As we reported in our last quarterly financial report, revenues are down. They still look down as of June 30th, and that's attributed to the fact that we had to close in January due to the COVID situation. So we do have a shortage of revenue compared to budget amounts. However, we are very hopeful that recovery is underway, and as we see in the community, more activity undertaken, and we look forward to the activity to begin at our arena and curling rink this October. Expenditures, again, the cost centers are basically meeting all budgeted amounts. We're not noting anything of large concern to bring to council's attention tonight, but I would point out again on expenditures, you know, when we sell fuel at the airport, it looks so great, but we also have to pay for the fuel too. So there's a little bit of offset on the cost side, although we're still exceeding our budgeted revenues. On energy costs, we are concerned. That's one area that will be over extremely on our budgeted amounts, and has to do with the rising cost of all our heating fuels and vehicle fuels. We exceeded the budgeted amount for heating fuels already this year by 23%. So at the halfway mark, we're already over by 25% of budgeted amounts. And we've already consumed almost 90% of what we budgeted for vehicle fuel. So at the end of the year, definitely we will show some higher expenditures than we had originally budgeted for. And that's just attributed to the rising costs of fuels. The other note of interest is just basically that capital projects have begun. They are all basically underway in some scenarios, some just beginning, some near ending. And we were able to add the tourism plan to our list of capital projects. It wasn't budgeted for at the beginning of the year, but because staff was successful in obtaining the grant for that plan, that's something new that's been added into the capital budget. So there is a council department summary attached to the report that council can certainly contact Manuela or myself if you have any detailed questions. And on behalf of Manuela, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
On the fuel increase costs in the buildings, is there any plan out there to put more efficient boilers or heating systems in?
Yes, absolutely. As the director of the community services department has spoken to council about and continues to prepare an application for funding for replacing all the HVAC units at the community center, which in our original plan included adding additional insulation, doing some other works within the arena that could save us substantial monies on the annual heating bill. I'm working with Rebecca, and we spoke to an area mining company today to discuss how that company might contribute to the municipality, so we could make some energy improvements. That would include using a different fuel source, changing windows, perhaps doing some things at our airport, so we could look at reducing energy. So to answer you, and I'll let Alex maybe explain a little more on the community center. There are opportunities to save energy, and we're doing the things that we can with the buildings that we have. Long term, there are some major infrastructure improvements required at all our buildings if we are going to save substantial energy, starting with this building. Alex, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is specific to the community center over the last 5 or 6 years. A lot of the components that we've replaced have been with a more energy efficient unit. So we've saved, I think I did a calculation on one of my reports, between 30 and 35% of our energy usage over the last 5 years, based on some really specific replacements in the plant, as well as switching all of our oil fired units to propane fired units. So we have saved some, but the bigger ticket items are still on the table.
And I'm sorry, Mayor, if I may add, staff is also looking through at alternative vehicles. So we are investigating grants that are available through Rebecca with the support of Kathy at a possibility of buying an electrical transit vehicle. We're looking at whatever opportunities we can to, as we replace our vehicles, look at electrical or hybrid models. So we are hoping that those opportunities are made available to the municipality, and we may, be able to look at reducing our energy costs in our vehicle system as we look at our fleet, and hopefully are able to reduce our fleet with electrical charged vehicles. So we're doing what we can.
Any other questions? I'd just like to thank you. That's having that quarterly report really lets us know what's happening within the budget. If there's any red flags, these things come up early enough to we can catch it and make plans for it. And as we're looking down the road at more efficient vehicles and needs and all that, I think that's time of the time to make the choice. Thank you. Okay, we'll go on to 7.4 refuge collection.
I'll handle that, Mr. Mayor. So in 2019, just to give everybody some background, we entered a 3-year contract with Provo with the opportunity to extend that contract by 2 years if we decided that's what we wanted to do. So the 3-year sort of time frame, it's come up, and we began negotiating with Provo, looking at this sort of 4 to 5 year in the original contract, saying, hey, inflation has been high. What are the likelihoods if we were to find other contractors, things like that, the prices would be reflected in that increase in inflation, whereas hopefully we could work within this original contract to sort of negotiate a better agreement, knowing that Provo would likely want an increase in the 2-year keys that we're following. So initially, Provo came to us saying that the next 2 years, what would happen is there'd be an 18% increase. We told them, unfortunately, we can't do that. So we negotiated with them extensively. We managed to get them down to a 16% increase on the 4-year with a 2-year or a 2% inflation for then year 5, they're going to hold that for us. Part of that negotiation is that, we tried to suggest perhaps we would do the increased inflation for a 4th year, wouldn't pursue a 5th. However, Provo said to us that is not something that they're interested in one of the 2 years. So we had to consider that in part of this negotiation process. The other side of it too is that we've reached out to other contractors, discussed with other municipalities what their refuse collection looks like. We're pretty much on par with other municipalities with the proposed increase that Provo has here. The other side of it too is just that trying to contact contractors and with, different variances in terms of inflation. Lots of contractors were interested initially, then said, hey, we need a year or so to get a proposal, some kind of contract in place. Unfortunately, that didn't leave us with, much time, and therefore, they weren't maybe interested in negotiating further down the road. So that kind of left us in this position where we are ready to accept that the 4 and 5 year fees that Provo has provided us, that we are ready to recommend that would be what we would go with, knowing that they are local, knowing that getting refuse collection from somewhere further away could actually result in ending up costing us more just because of how crazy fuel prices and insurance and just different aspects of operating within. So that's where we stand. And yeah, council, have any questions?
Wishes?
Yeah. We only have a 2 more year contract.
Get the ability to extend for 2 years.
Okay, so for 16% more, we've got 5 years.
No, we got the additional 2 years. So the 16% increase will be on year 4 with a 2% increase for inflation on year 5, and they're going to hold no matter what inflation is for that next year. So it's only 2 years, it's for years 4 and 5.
Okay. I've gotten stuck.
Go ahead, Councilor.
Do we have an escape clause in our contract where,
Not that I am aware of. I would have to look into that, but I'm.
I feel like it's pretty standard in most contracts where, given certain rules.
Yeah,
I'd be interested in learning about that.
yeah, absolutely. I can definitely.
I got a couple questions for you. Last year, we gave these for next to person on the garbage truck and for fuel, right?
I believe there was a raise and an adjustment due to that in 2018.
Was it 2018 already?
Yeah. There was the contract before this 3-year contract.
Okay. No, I was just wondering what that percentage was. And now it's 16%. Also, different costs during garbage pickups. Do we resolve like going to the hospital and picking up garbage? Like we charge for 1 pickup, we make it 3 a week.
I believe, Mr. Mayor, that we can bring this back to council on September 6th with Dan's report on that. It is my understanding that we did resolve it because we had required those commercial businesses to arrange directly with Provo for their own bins. So they are paying for their own collection of their own bins, but I would have to have Dan speak to that to be more accurate. So this is not something, a topic that council has to make a decision, or is it forwarded to the regular? We can bring this back and answer you accurately.
Yeah,
On
because
your
there was a question, I remember the fact there was a question
Yes,
that we charge for 1 pickup, but we're going back 3 times a week. I just
Correct.
wanted to know if that was resolved, but like you see in your building, anybody's got bid all motor. And I just wanted to know if we were giving them 1 pickup at our cost, or we were giving them 2 pickups. At our cost. Just something that we need to know.
yes.
Just for the fact that we're raising it, but we're still getting caught on the side for extra expenses as well. So,
Absolutely.
go ahead.
And even the number of garbage bins at each place, like how much they're getting charged, like Like some apartment buildings, are they getting charged the same as, like, say, a smaller place, like out back, if we had one up back here, are they getting charged the same, even though you go back probably more times?
That is something that, yeah, Dan.
Just look at the schedule and see what,
Yeah.
how that
we
plays
can-
out,
we
that's
can
all.
do that. One
Just-
thing I do know is that they do rent those, they do
Yes,
pay for those bins, but I'm not sure if there's a repeat fee for that side.
the repeat pickup is.
Yeah.
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 And we know that fuel costs have went up. So, at least, so. No, I'd like to get those the answers first and then bring it back and discuss it.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. Okay, on camera session. We're gonna start closed session. The next meeting will be Tuesday, September 6th. Okay, we're turning the meeting at 7:15. Take that over. Councilor Hatfield. Let's 5 minutes and then move on to. the council. Okay, good.
There is.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order at 7:16. 7:16. Members present, they're still here. It's nice to know. Close your interest. You need. Seeing none. On. Approval of the agenda.
Moved by, excuse me, moved by Councillor Pino, seconded by Councillor Chason, resolved that the agenda for the regular meeting of council scheduled for Tuesday, August 16, 2022, be approved as presented.
All in favor? Motion carried. Delegation to presentation, there's none. Move on number 5, announcements. I'd like to make a couple announcements. I'd like to thank Councilor Wendy Keelan for putting her name forward to run for mayor. Congratulations, and I hope you do well. I'd also like to thank all the other members who put the names forward for councilors. I hope they will do well. We've got 7 now, I think.
8.
8. Okay. Any other announcements? Anybody? Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for your comments. I also just wanted to provide council with a brief update on the EDAC community, the Economic Development and Tourism Committee. So yesterday evening, we met in council chambers and we had a very fulsome meeting regarding the tourism plan. We had a presentation by consultants, managing consultants, and Angela Kalaisi. She's a member of the committee. She stepped up as vice chair. And this is a member of council on the chair of the committee. So it's very equal group of volunteers from the community. So really, really happy to. So it gives us.
Thanks for the information. Go ahead, Councilor.
Announcement to Rebecca to sell down that Mr. Clement came through with the donation of the wood for flower boxes. And we'll see you at the next meeting to get all together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Councilor.
I just want to tell everybody that this weekend is the 40th anniversary annual Salmon Derby, and hope to see as many people on council. Anybody that wants to come down and see us. We have 40 fishermen, only 40 teams, but that's the way it goes. Go to gas.
Good. I won't be there, sorry, I gotta go away for my 70th birthday.
Okay, you're excused then.
Okay, any other? You good? Mitch, you got
No, I don't.
Okay,
I would just like to remind the public that on Friday, it is nomination day. The town office will be open to accept nominations between the hours of 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. So anyone who's interested in running for office, please stop by and file your papers.
thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the announcements given of notice. On number 6, adoption of minutes, we have a
Moved by Councillor Pino, second by Councillor Schaefer, resolved that the following minutes of the meeting of council be adopted as presented. Minutes of a regular meeting of council held on Tuesday, July 12th, 2022, as contained on pages 1 to 7, inclusive of the minute.
all in favor? Motion carried. Correspondence, we have lots of correspondence and lots to read. One of the ones I'd like to, 7.2, I'd like to congratulate Heather Rainville on the graduate of the Diploma in Municipal Administration with honors. That's,
So she's all done?
she's graduated with the honors. Yeah, that's good.
I'll pass that on there.
Thank you.
Mayor and council.
Congratulations. Because that's all done off most of the work and
Yes.
time. It's a lot of work. Okay, consent agenda.
Moved by Councillor Schaefer, second by Councillor Pino, resolved that the items listed under consent agenda. Items 8.2 to 8.4 be approved as recommended.
All in favor? Motion carried. Nine, staff reports.
Moved by Councillor Cannon, second by Councillor Hatfield, resolved that the Council of the Corporation Municipality of Walbrook does hereby receive the following staff reports, a copy of which are attached here to A, CC 2022-04 Joint Compliance Audit Committee, and B, MB 2022-05 Second Quarterly Financial Report.
All in favor? Motion carried. Mr. Rising. Bylaws.
Moved by Councillor Hatfield, seconded by Councillor Cannon, resolved that the following bylaws be introduced and read first, second, and third time, and finally passed, and that the mayor and clerk do sign and seal the same. Any rule of this council to the contrary notwithstanding. Bylaw number 3527-22 to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting held on the 16th day of August 2022. Bylaw number 3528-22 to appoint a joint compliance audit committee. And bylaw number 3529-22 to enter an agreement with Espernet and Associates Limited to undertake engineering services related to the water master plan.
All in favor? Motion carried. Okay, 14, we'll move into closed session.
I just need a mover in a second.
So, Kesa, and second, Mr. Dion. Thank you.
It's a legal issue. And it's, thank you.
Yes, sorry, Jim, we're going to.
So the
meeting is done for us?
Yes.
Okay.
Jim, for coming.
Will we just go right into open camera or do we? Okay.
Ready?
Go ahead.
Moved by Councillor Cannon, second by Councillor Hatfield, resolved that this meeting close at 7:53 p.m.
All in favor? Motion carried. Thanks, everybody.